Satnam. This is Satpura coming to you for our weekly Dharma talk. And as you know, a couple of weekends ago, my husband and I drove down to McAllen, Texas, and we weren't given access to any of the DHS facilities, but we stood outside, and I didn't share this initially because I didn't really have words, and I don't know that I do today either. But we stood outside this facility that later Elizabeth Warren and other senators visited and, talked about what they witnessed inside. But I stood outside in the parking lot and looked at the American flag that was flying in the courtyard. And I've never been particularly prayerful as a person. My mother tells stories about me as a child that I refused to say my evening prayers before bed. That is still my innate response to someone asking to pray, is resistance. And I've never been particularly patriotic, at least not to anything like a flag or a tribe of any kind. I'm wired differently, I guess. So it was an interesting experience to stand there looking at the American flag flying outside what looked like from the outside an innocuous warehouse, and to know that inside human beings were being held in cages, essentially, for doing nothing other than coming here to seek asylum from violence in their own communities. So I stood there and I stared at that flag and everything that I've been taught that it's supposed to mean. And I offered a Sikh Ardas. Now, the Sikhi Ardas is about 300 years old, and it's a traditional prayer that talks about the sacrifice of this particular group of people so that they might have an identity and an infinity within their identity. And some of the lines from the Ardas talk about that sacrifice. Some of the lines from the Ardas talk about seeing the faults of others and overlooking them. Some of the lines from the Ardas talk about our oneness and our willingness to be accountable to ourselves and to other people for any missteps. And inherent in the Ardas is this idea of forgiveness, that it's embedded in the language of the Ardas. So I offered this Ardas. We took a hukam, and I have to say that moment of looking at the flag and offering a prayer from this tradition that I've adopted was one of the more powerful internal experiences I've ever had. Because I have this innate resistance to prayer, because I have this sense of, what's the point of the joint? It had an impact on me because I could feel in the vibration of my darshan, my eyes seeing the flag, and my words vibrating an experience of forgiveness. And then the language of the hukam coming, which was all about no one comes to help. Where do we go? No one is showing up. It was really interesting hukam that came that day. I'd never read a phrase like that from the Guru. And there we were trying to help, but we were powerless. There was nothing we could do other than offer this prayer. And I felt the frequency of it. And one would think that as a sound and mantra specialist that I would understand frequency at this point in my practice of 20 years. But I am continually struck and in awe of the power of vibration. And I recently ran across a quote that it's like, it's not what we say, it's what we vibrate. And there's this difference, and we talk about the difference when we talk about singing or chanting versus vibrating. And so the vibration is the intention, the conscious intention, our frontal lobe being engaged in prayer, in frequency. But it's also, what is our subconscious agenda? What do we actually believe? What do we actually feel when we offer those words? Because if, and I call it minding the gap, if there's a huge gap between what you're saying and what we actually vibrate, what we know is true, where there's no gap between how we present ourselves and our internal experience of ourselves, when there's no gap between that reality, that's frequency, that's vibratory, that's vibrating. And so as I stood and I held this space for the prayer, for the flag, for this idea of what does it mean to be a U.S. citizen? What does it mean to hold the words of our foundational document as true? I realized that the internal gap between what it means on the face of being American, what our policies are, what our international relationships are, and what that internal frequency is, we have to start holding it in prayer. Me, who is so cynical about prayer, but we have to begin vibrating and allowing that gap to narrow and narrow and narrow. Because my reality of living here in a state, Texas, that on the outside, on the edges, in its frequency, in its projection, I should say, in its projection is, for me, antithetical to what I perceive as the foundational ideas of America, right? We're supposedly anti-immigrant. We're supposedly against the workers' rights. But when you actually vibrate with people here on the ground, they're the most generous, welcoming, helpful, curious people I've ever met. I grew up here. So we need to begin vibrating the reality of what it is. And if we vibrate that reality, then perhaps the dissonance between our foundational documents and today's policies will come and begin vibrating together. I have to believe this because as an individual, I feel so powerless. But if we collectively begin to offer our prayer and vibrate the reality of what it means to be community, to say, give me your poor, to understand that the prosperity and the frequency of the United States, of our founding documents, is that we are a people of prosperity, of expansiveness, and we have this tremendous shadow, this incredibly dark past. This is not the first time we've separated children from their families. This is not the first time we have said, only us. And it's a shadow that we have to constantly be alert to, be ready to look for, and say, and challenge. Because the frequency, the highest vibratory frequency of this country is that people come here to realize themselves. People come here to realize their own potential. And that movement, that singularity of purpose gets lost every once in a while in people's fears. But if we vibrate together, then I think we have an opportunity to see ourselves more clearly, to make amends for our past, and to set the right course, to set a course based on our highest ideals together, collectively. And collectively is the challenge. Democracy is hard. Democracy is messy. Community is challenging. But I know for myself, I can't see myself clearly unless I see myself in other people. If we want to go to the cave and we want to vibrate on the bowl, great, do it. But that's not what the Aquarian Age is about. That's not what the United States is about. And it's not what this global community of Kundalini yogis and Sikh Dharma practitioners all around the world, it's not what we're about. We're about seeing each other reflected in each other's eyes. And it's about the foundation of perfection found in forgiveness, pre-forgiveness, in that ardas. So I offer my prayer, and I hope that you vibrate with me so that that gap between who we project ourselves to be and who we actually are becomes so narrow that the power of the word, the Pavan Guru, changes. And we actually are who we are, individually, collectively, and universally. Satnam.